Hello and welcome back to Principles of Macroeconomics. I am still your host, Dr. B. Happy to have you with us. We are in week 6 already, if you could believe that or not, right? Time is moving by very, very quickly. First and foremost, of course, I want to start by saying thank you very much for your hard work so far in the course. Uh, Week 6, we are quite halfway, but we're getting there. Um, there are about two chapters in every single week, or there's two in one week and one in the next. That's kind of been the pattern of the course. And I just want to say thank you for your hard work in the course so far. I know that it's a lot of stuff, and I know that it's not easy, especially since you have other courses and family life and work life and everything life going on at the same time. So just want to say thanks. I'm sure you don't hear it enough from your professors, but you'll hear it from me. And I just want to say thank you for your hard work. It means a lot to me, and hopefully you're getting a lot of information out of the course, and you're learning some things, and that's what it's all about. So thank you. I just wanted to say that, and thanks for your hard work. So okay, let's start off by talking about taxes today. Taxes is never a fun topic to talk about because it's something that we all have to pay, uh, regardless of how you pay it. You're all paying taxes, and it kind of sucks because, but it's less money out of your pocket. But at the same time, it's kind of good, right? Because it helps to pay for a lot of things like public services, infrastructure, education, uh, you name it, right? A lot of social and a lot of infrastructure type things is what our taxes pay for. So from that perspective, it's good, but from the perspective of it coming out of our pockets, it's not the greatest. So let's talk about taxes and let's talk about the impact that taxes have on us. We're going to talk about the true cost of taxation. First thing I would like to talk about is called deadweight loss from taxes. Just as the name implies, a deadweight loss is a loss based off of taxes. And so a tax, as you know, is what we pay on a good or a service when we purchase the good or the service. And when we purchase a good or a service, we pay the tax to the people that we're buying it from, the seller. And the seller, in turn, takes that tax money that we gave them from the purchase of the good or the service, and they, in turn, pay that tax to the tax agencies. There's a couple of different tax agencies you need to be aware of. Of course, first and foremost is the Internal Revenue Service. That's the federal taxes. The federal taxes collect revenue taxes from us, the citizens, and also from the businesses. If you work, you pay taxes. You pay both federal, state, and sometimes local taxes. It comes out of your paycheck, right? And the way it works is for every hour that you work, you're taxed. And the average is about 1/3 of every dollar. 33 cents out of every dollar is tax money. And it's divided between the federal, state, and local governments. About a third of what you make is taxed, at least here in the United States. In other countries, it's more than that. It's very few, it's less, but in most cases, it's more. For example, in the European Union and Canada, and in some countries in Central America, you'll find that the tax rate is significantly higher than that. It can be as high as 40, 50, 60% on the general population. And for the wealthier individuals, it's even more than that. So, something to consider every time you pay your taxes is that it could always be more, it could always be worse, right? So the taxes are collected from us from the Internal Revenue Service, the DC Revenue Department. If you live in another state like Maryland or Virginia, there's taxes you have to pay to those states. If you work in another state and live in another state, that tax situation gets real interesting, right? Because you're technically paying taxes in the one that you live in, not necessarily the one that you work in. And so that could get very complicated. So our taxes pay for public services like education, the police department, fire department, infrastructure such as roadways, road maintenance, um, and a lot of other components like water supply, etc. Right? So all our taxes pay for all these things, and of course they also pay for defense through the military and through other national services that are provided to us. We also pay into what's called Social Security, which is kind of like a form of a government savings program, if you will, for when you retire. And we also pay into other benefits, if you will, such as Medicare and Medicaid. So all of these taxes that are collected by the government agencies, and they're designed to pay for various services. The thing that's important to know is that there's what we call a dead weight loss that's taken into consideration, and that is when there's a difference between what's being collected and what's being remitted. So we're going to talk about these things. So taxes that are collected on goods and services from the buyers by the sellers, there is a price difference here, right? The price difference is the tax that's being collected. So you go to a store and you see a sale price of $1.99, you end up paying $2.07. Well, why is that? Because there's a tax you're paying. It's a 6% or up to 9%, depending on where you're living. A sales tax. And so that difference is the tax. So we call that price wedge. So the price is paid by the buyer, right? So the buyer's paying both the price plus the sales tax. The seller takes that tax and remits it to the tax agency, and they also collect the revenue from what they sold you. The price goes down on goods and services. The quantity also goes down that's being offered by the seller. So this goes back to the fundamental supply and demand concept. On supply and demand, as you know, the two intersect is called a point of equilibrium. And as the prices change, the quantities also change. And as that price changes, the tax collected changes. That changes what causes the dead weight loss. And we'll talk a little bit more about this here in a second. So the burden of the taxes being collected comes from the consumers. It's paid to gets paid to the sellers. The sellers remit it to the tax agencies. It's the concept of the tax burden. The taxes are distributed between the producers and the consumers. Consumers pay the producers the taxes, and the producers then remit those taxes to the tax agencies. The tax burden is determined by elasticities of supply and demand. Remember, when something is elastic, it means that you're sensitive to the changes in the price. So the more change a good has in terms of price, the more elastic it is, and therefore, if the price goes up, you'll buy less of it. It goes down, you'll buy more of it. And that changes the amount of taxes being collected by the producer. And because of the taxes involved, the market for the goods and services are actually a little bit smaller than they could be. because without that tax, the likelihood is the price would be a little higher, but you would end up actually buying more. And we'll talk more about this here in a second. So take a look at this graph here. Notice the effect that taxes have on prices and the quantity. So take a look here. The buyer pays the taxes, as you know. The seller receives the taxes and remits them. Take a look at this. You'll notice that price without tax line, the quantity without tax line, that's your point of equilibrium. That's where supply and demand meet. So take a look at this, though. You'll notice that the buyer pays the tax, the sales tax. What you probably don't know is that the seller also pays a tax, sales tax. Why is that, you might be asking? The seller's not always the producer of the product. For example, you buy a red shirt at Macy's. Macy's didn't make the red shirt. They bought it from a manufacturer, technically a distributor. So Macy's had to pay taxes when they purchased inventory. That's where that difference comes in. So Macy's paid taxes on the inventory that they purchased, and you, the buyer, pay taxes when you purchased it from Macy's. So technically, taxes are being paid twice on goods and services. You see? That's why you see that the size of the tax is actually double. Because the buyer pays taxes the seller pays taxes when they receive the product, they purchase the product. The buyer pays the taxes when they purchase the product from the seller. So that's what creates this sense of double taxation. In economics, as you know, the idea is that everyone benefits from the sale of goods and services. That's the idea, okay? Everyone benefits. The idea of economic welfare is that buyers have what we call a consumer surplus. We have a lot of goods available to us, buyers. And the sellers have a producer surplus. They have a lot of goods available for sale. So as goods are being purchased by both the sellers and the buyers, the government is receiving tax revenue. This is the tax times the quantity sold. That's how we calculate the tax revenue. It's the number of units being sold times its tax, right? To find the tax amount, you simply take the sales price times tax rate. So you find the tax amount, and you multiply that by the number of units being sold. That gives you the amount of total tax revenue the government's collecting. Of course, the benefit is the government's collecting these taxes is to benefit the public good, providing things like education services, police, fire, defense, and of course, infrastructure. All these things are designed for the public good. That's the idea behind economic welfare. So the way we look at tax revenue when the government collects the taxes, it looks like this. It's the tax times the quantity. That's the simple way of putting it. Tax times the quantity is the amount of taxes the government's collecting. What about this little difference we see here? There's What about below? What about above? What about to the right? That's the deadweight loss. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail. The tax revenue that the government collects is the total tax times the quantity. And this gives us the total tax amount that the government is collecting. It's at the points of quantity with tax and the difference between what the seller receives and what the buyer pays. Because remember, the seller is paying tax when they purchased it originally. The buyer is paying tax when they buy it from the seller. Therefore, both parties are paying taxes. See? So we know that areas B and D on this graph represent the total taxes being collected by the government. But what about areas C and E? So let's break down this in a logical way. Area C and E shows the fall in total surplus and the deadweight loss of the tax. Because remember, the areas B and D represent the total tax. Areas C and E in this graph represent the deadweight loss. We call it a deadweight loss because that area represents a loss in the surplus and a loss in the tax. But a long way of calculating this, which I don't recommend you do because it's complex. But if you look at total surplus, which represents areas A, B, C, D, E, and F without the taxes, with the taxes is A, B, D, and F. The change is minus area C plus E. Complex, right? It's kind of confusing, to be honest. But the way I want you to think about this is two things that you have to remember. One is total tax the government's collecting is the difference between what the price the seller receives and the price the buyer pays. Because remember, both the seller and the buyer have to pay tax on goods sold. That's what creates that difference. That whole area, B and D, is what the government is collecting. The areas to the right, C and E, represent the deadweight loss. This is an area where there's a reduction in surplus and there's a reduction in tax. The tax is not being collected there. Right? That's why we call it a deadweight loss. When there's welfare without a tax, there's a consumer surplus in areas A, B, and C in that graph that we just saw earlier. And there's a producer surplus in D, E, and F. The total tax revenue at that point is zero because it's without tax. Remember, tax revenue comes from the collection of the taxes. If there's no tax, the revenue is zero. When there is a collection of the tax, there's a smaller consumer surplus, a smaller producer surplus, and a total tax revenue represented in areas B and D that we saw earlier in the graph. A small overall welfare being generated from the tax revenue. The deadweight loss of taxation when the loss of surplus to the buyers and sellers in the form of a tax exceeded the revenue raised by the government. In other words, area beyond government's collection of taxes is represented as the deadweight loss. It's a reduction of those surpluses. The deadweight loss is the fall in the total surplus as a result in the market distortion such as taxes. The higher the tax rate, the higher the amount of revenue that the government's collecting in the form of taxes, equals a higher deadweight loss. Makes sense. Taxes distort incentives. The higher the tax rates, the less efficient markets are because there's less revenue for them to work with. If the government takes a bigger part of your pie, you have less pie to work with. What about trade? Of course, as you know, when we trade with other countries, we have to pay sometimes tariff or quota. We talked about these earlier on when we talked about international trade. A tariff is a form of a tax. Tariff is a form of a tax on trade. So, as the tax revenue is being collected from trade, deadweight loss and gains from trade are affected as follows. Taxes cause the deadweight loss. Prevents buyers and sellers from realizing the gains from the trade. When something is sold internationally, there's taxes being paid to both countries, a form of a tariff. Unless, of course, there's something like the North American Free Trade Agreement in place. In that case, there are no tariffs. However, there's still taxes being paid to the local governments. The differences between the buyer's values and seller's costs less than the tax. That's when there's a gain. If the tax is low, both parties benefit. If the tax is high, no one benefits. For the government agencies. So what you need to remember there is that the higher the tax rate, the higher the deadweight loss. So here we can see, just like when we looked at the individual consumers and sellers, there's a deadweight loss from trade. The lost gains from trade. It's deadweight loss. Same concept applies. One of the things that determine deadweight loss? Price elasticity. As you know, something is elastic, that means that we're sensitive to the changes in the price. We're going to buy less when the price goes up. If the price is already high and then there's a tax added to it, chances are we're not going to buy that. We're going to buy a substitute or something else. Of course, that has effects on the supply and demand curve. The more elastic supply curve is, the larger the deadweight loss is. That makes sense because if the price goes up drastically, I'm not going to buy it. It means there's going to be a larger deadweight loss. Or if the price goes up, it means the tax goes up too. The more elastic the demand curve is, the larger the deadweight loss. Again, the more elasticity, the more deadweight loss. That's what you have to remember from this part. The greater the elasticity of supply and demand, the greater the deadweight loss. Straightforward. Let's take a look graphically. What does it mean? So as we can see, when something is inelastic, it means that we're not as sensitive to the price changes in the short run. Remember? We talked about elasticity, I think a few weeks ago. We had said that when something is inelastic, it means that we're not as sensitive to those price changes in the short run. Price goes up, price goes down, not a big deal, but you can see the effect on the deadweight loss is relatively small. When something is elastic, that means that the consumers are very sensitive to price changes. And when we're sensitive to price changes, it creates a larger deadweight loss. It means the more that we buy at a higher price, the more taxes we pay. creates a larger deadweight loss. And here we can see the same effect on the supply side. That's what this shows us. The takeaway here is that when something is inelastic, there's a small deadweight loss. When it's elastic, there's a larger deadweight loss. As the tax lines increase, the deadweight loss increases. Very straightforward. Tax revenue goes up, but then eventually it levels out and starts to decrease. Why, you might ask? Because at higher prices, people buy less. The higher the tax, drastically reduces the size of the market. When the government's taking more of the share, markets are worse off. There's going to be less buyers and sellers because higher prices, higher taxes, less people buying, less people selling. Remember, I think it was last week we talked briefly about the price, the differences. Remember when it comes to the buyers and the sellers? As the price changes, the number of sellers in the market changes as well. Remember? The same principle applies here. The idea is that as taxes increase, there's going to be less sellers and less buyers in the market. Here we can see the effects. Small tax, it's going to be a little revenue. The weight loss is small. Medium tax, it's a little larger. The large tax, huge debt weight loss. Right? So the overall point that I'm trying to get here is just because the taxes go up does not necessarily mean the tax revenue goes up. Because as the taxes go up, if they go up too high, a lot less people will buy it. Therefore, the tax revenue does not go up, it goes down. To summarize, I like this one a lot. We see that as the tax rate rises, the weight loss rises. Now, the one on the right is the most interesting to me. This is called the Art Laffer curve. Art Laffer is a very popular economist. He's still around. He was very popular during the Reagan administration, and he developed what was then called the bell curve, now called the Laffer curve. And what you'll notice is that at a point, tax revenue starts going down as the tax increases. What this represents is a shrinking marketplace. So at the very top of this bell curve here on the right, the Laffer curve, the very top here, that's the point of inflection where people won't tolerate certain tax rates. They'll start buying less. That's what causes a decrease in the total tax revenue. Very fascinating part of the topic. So it's interesting, there's two sides to this argument. Some people say, oh, we need a smaller government and we should pay less taxes. I tend to agree with that to an extent. We can't just get rid of taxes because if we did that, we wouldn't have any infrastructure, we wouldn't have schools, we wouldn't have public services. We need some. If we cut the federal tax rates, it creates a lot of economic activity because businesses have more discretionary funds to grow their business with. That makes sense. usually means more hiring and very positive things for the overall economy. However, the federal income tax rate also reflects less um, public services being available. So it's a two-edged sword. You just have to know which way to cut. So is it good? Is it not good? It depends. Okay. That's our discussion on taxes. Any question about taxes? Ask me anything about taxes. Okay, this is your opportunity. You like things you don't like. Thoughts on taxes? What do y'all think? Free to unmute your mic and talk to me about taxes. I don't like paying them. That's just me. Thoughts? Y'all okay with this topic? Questions at all about the taxes?
No.
Okay. It's fair enough. If you don't have any questions, that's okay. I just want to make sure. All right, cool. Let's stop this part of the recording. I'm going to jump into chapter 9. I'm going to shift gears a little bit. So stand by. Hold on a second.